If it's good for us, then it's good for the earth. And if it's good for the earth, then it's good for us. But if it's bad for us, then it's bad for the earth. And if it's bad for the earth, then it's bad for us. If we dump toxic chemicals into the watershed, it's bad for the earth and it's bad for us. But if we eat pesticide-free organic food, it's good for us and it's good for the earth. If we choke the air with auto exhaust, it's bad for us. And the acid rain is bad for the earth. If we're killing off life forms someplace else, chances are we'll be killing ourselves off sometime too. If it's bad for us, then it's bad for the earth. And if it's bad for the earth, then it's bad for us. But if it's good for us, then it's good for the earth. And if it's good for the earth, then it's good for us. And if it's good for us, guess what? It's good for you. If war were good for us, it would be good for the earth. But it's no good for the earth, and it's killing us. The good thing is we can start improvements right away. If you don't know where to start, well then just let me say, sing. If it's good for you, then it's good for the earth. And if it's good for the earth, then it's good for us. And if it's good for us, then it's good for the earth. And if it's good for the earth, then it's good for us. And if it's good for us, hey, then it's good for you. And here's the kicker. And those you love, and those you love, and those you love. Woo! There you go. Thank you, folks. Thank you. Thanks.
Friends and friends. So we're going to move into now the session tonight of Socialism in the Park, which is the first of three. We will have one next Wednesday night and then the following Wednesday night. We'll talk more about that later. But right now it's Origins of Class and the State. And our speaker tonight is Comrade Corey David. Corey, take it away. We'll open it for discussion when he's finished.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming. All right, so maybe. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. All right, so I'm going to give a talk on class and the origins of inequality. Start out with some information on the wealth gap. So a 2019 Oxfam report cites that the richest 26 people in the world control more wealth than the poorest half of the population, about 3.8 billion people. And in 2018, 2,200 billionaires saw their wealth increase by 12%, while the bottom 50% saw a drop of 11%. Now, these numbers are kind of misleading because, well, not misleading, but the difference is also attributed to debt. A lot huge student debts and household debts made 10% of Americans fall into the bottom tier on the wealth thing, because they are hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. So it's a little bit misleading, but they actually owe that money, and so that money belongs to somebody else, and that money belongs to usually the billionaire class. But anyways, to go on, the Credit Suisse Research Institute said in its 2015 World Wealth Report, the top 1% of the population alone owns 46% of all global assets. It is now estimated that they own over half. The richest nations with wealth per adult of more than 100,000 are concentrated in North America, Western Europe, and among the rich Asian Pacific and Middle Eastern countries. But even in the rich countries, that wealth is very unevenly spread. Wealth is much more concentrated than ever, and with wealth comes power. Why is this the case? Was it always so? Is it a function of human nature? The short answer is no. The thing we call history covers a short period of human life on this planet. Prehistory, before writing and civilization, spans millions of years. During most of prehistoric human existence, class inequality was unknown to our species. Modern anthropologists have studied surviving prehistoric peoples. Margaret Mead and others have described the feasts of Polynesian people who gathered to consume all the surplus of their harvest so that no individual accumulates riches. The potlatch of British Columbia, coastal tribes, is such a ritual. Why do you think Canadian states authorities banned the practice? When exclusive reliance on hunting and gathering gave way to agriculture, each family worked a piece of land for a given period. But the fields were frequently redistributed to avoid favoring any member of the community. Pastures and woods were used in common. Society was not yet divided into classes at the village level. The idea that social inequality is rooted in the inequality of an individual talents or is the product of innate egoism or human nature has no scientific basis. The exploitation of one social class by another is the product of the historical evolution of society and not of human nature. There have not always been rich and poor. There will not always be. Before the class division of society first appeared, humanity lived in a state of clan or tribal communism. Nostalgia for the ancient community way of life is expressed in the much dreamed of Golden Age, a dream described by classical Chinese, Greek, and Latin authors. Virgil explicitly states that at the time of the Golden Age, harvests were shared in common, which implies that private property did not exist. Many famous philosophers and scholars thought that the source of society's ills was class division, and proposed ways to replace it. Plato described the state of war between the poor and rich parts of town. Jewish sects and the founders of the Christian church urged a return to the community of goods. St. John Chrysostomos was the first to say property is theft. This continued through the Middle Ages with St. Francis of Assisi and later in the Reformation. John Ball, a pupil of Wycliffe, said in the 14th century, slavery must be abolished and all men must be equal. Those who call themselves our masters consume what we produce. They owe their luxury to our labor. Finally, we see products from an egalitarian society outlined in Thomas More's Utopia and Campanella's The City of the Sun. Alongside the spiritual revolt were actual insurrections of oppressed classes against their oppressors. This history of all class societies is the history of class struggle that tear them apart. These class struggles take a variety of forms. In China, innumerable peasant uprisings make the history of the successive dynasties which ruled the empire. Likewise in Japan, especially in the 18th century. In ancient Greece and Rome, there was an uninterrupted series of slave revolts, the most well-known led by Spartacus, which contributed to the downfall of the Roman Empire. Among the free citizens, there was a violent struggle between the indebted peasants and the usurer merchants, between those who had property and those who did not. In the Middle Ages, class struggle set feudal lords against free communities based on small commodity production, as well as artisans against merchants within these communities, and some urban artisans against nearby peasants. But the most savage class struggles were those between the feudal nobility and the peasantry, which was trying to throw off the feudal yoke. These took a revolutionary form with the War of Wat Tyler in England, the Jacqueries in France, and the Hussites in Bohemia, and the Peasant War in Germany in the 16th century. History between the 16th and 18th centuries is marked by class struggles between the nobility and the bourgeoisie, between master artisans and journeymen, between rich bankers and traders on one side, and the unskilled laborers of the towns on the other. These struggles were heralded the bourgeoisie revolutions, modern capitalism, and the class struggle of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. Now let's return to the question, what are the economic sources of social inequality? Prehistoric humanity lived in conditions of extreme poverty, obtaining the food necessary for subsistence by hunting, fishing, and fruit gathering. Humanity could not increase or in any way control the natural resources it needed to survive. Everyone had to work. Everyone's labor was necessary to keep community alive. Granting material privileges to one part of the tribe would condemn another part to famine. That is why the social organization at this stage tends to maintain maximum equality. Only the development of techniques of agriculture and animal husbandry changed the situation of extreme poverty. The development of agriculture, the greatest economic revolution ever, is attributed to women, along with pottery and weaving. These started to take place around 15,000 BC in Asia Minor, Mesopotamia, Iran, Turkestan, gradually progressing into Egypt, India, China, North Africa, and Mediterranean Europe. This is known as the Neolithic Revolution, the final part of the Stone Age. Tools were made of polished stone. Tools allowed humans to produce its own food, reduced dependence on forces of nature, permitted building up of food reserves, which in turn released certain members of community from the need to produce their own food. As a result, a certain division of labor could occur, a specialization of jobs, which increased the productivity of labor. With the appearance of a large and permanent surplus of food, primitive social organization was overturned. Once the surplus was concentrated over great areas by military and religious chiefs, or became more abundant in the village due to improved agricultural techniques, they created the conditions for social inequality. The surplus can be used to feed prisoners captured in war, instead of being killed for lack of food. Prisoners then can be required to work for food. That is how slavery began in ancient Greece. The same surplus can be used to feed priests, soldiers, officials, lords, and kings. That is how the ruling class appeared in Egypt, Babylon, Iran, India, and China. A social division of labor completes the economic division of labor, a specialization in productive skills. Social production is henceforth divided into two parts: the necessary product, the means of subsistence for the producers, without whose labor society would collapse, and the social surplus product, the surplus product produced by laborers and seized by the owning class, priests, lords, nobles, officials, etc. The appearance of distinct and antagonistic social classes, productive classes, and ruling classes, thus gives birth to the state, which is the principal institution for the maintenance of given social conditions, that is, social inequality. The division of society into classes is consolidated by the seizure of the means of production by the owning classes. The seizure of the social surplus by one part of society is the result of social struggle. It is only maintained by constant social struggle. This is what some people call the contradiction in society. At the same time, it represents an inevitable stage in economic process. It separates two basic economic functions: production and accumulation. Seizure of the means of production. Seizure of social surplus by one part of society. Accumulation allows part of humanity to have enough leisure time to stockpile tools, learn complicated techniques like metallurgy, to systematically observe natural phenomena, etc. This helps to increase the social productivity of labor. These leisure time activities are key to civilization, to the development of astronomy, geometry, hydrography, mineralogy, etc. The separation of intellectual and manual labor accompanies the separation of society into classes. The division of society into classes therefore represents a condition of historical progress. As long as society is too poor to allow all of its members to dedicate themselves to intellectual labor, to accumulate functions, but a heavy price is paid for this progress. Up until the beginning of capitalism, only the ruling classes profited from the growth of social productivity of labor. The situation of peasants hardly changed at all in 4,000 years. So why have all past egalitarian revolutions failed? The short answer is this: as long as surplus is not sufficient to liberate the whole of humanity from drudgery, any social revolution which tries to re-establish equality is condemned to failure. It can only go in one of two ways. It can destroy any social surplus and return to extreme poverty by way of war or some other massive event. But the reappearance of technical and economic progress would give rise again to social inequalities, or can dispossess the old owning class in favor of a new one, such as the bourgeoisie revolution in France. An egalitarian society founded on abundance and not poverty, and that is the aim of socialism, can only be developed on the basis of an advanced economy in which the social surplus is so high it frees all producers from drudgery and provides enough leisure time for everyone to fulfill the managerial tasks of economic, social, and political life. Why has it taken 15,000 years of social surplus production for humanity to achieve enough development of production which allows us to envision a socialist solution to social inequality? Because as long as the owning classes accumulated wealth in natural form, they consumed it themselves. The ancient kings and slave masters, and later the feudal nobles, had no interest in increasing production once they had filled their palaces with luxury items. There is a limit to how much the rulers could consume. Only when the social surplus product takes the form of money, of surplus value, and when it buys not only the consumer goods, but also means of production, the new ruling class, the bourgeoisie, becomes interested in the unlimited growth of production. Then all scientific discoveries can be applied to production, and the conditions exist for the rise of modern industrial capitalism. In primitive communist societies, administrative functions were carried out by all members of the tribe. Everyone carried arms and took part in decision-making. There was the community, the collectivity, there was no state. The state was born when these functions were seized by a separate group of people. An army was formed, distinct from the mass of armed citizens. Judges replaced generals' assemblies in the task of judging their equals. Hereditary chiefs, kings, and nobles took the place of temporary leaders of a particular activity, elected by the collective. Priests, clerks, teachers, philosophers, scribes, and mandarins were set apart from the rest of the community. Thus, the birth of the state is the result of two changes. A permanent social surplus allows part of society to specialize in and improve accumulative and administrative functions. At the same time, it allows the new elite to exclude the rest of the community from political functions, which before had been everyone's business. The exclusion of the many means profit for a few. The new rulers exclude the exploited and productive classes from those functions, which would allow them to end their exploitation. The owning classes use the new armies to help them extract taxes and force labor. Groups of armed men force farmers and cattle breeders, and later artisans and merchants to give up part of their production for the benefit of the ruling classes. To this end, they carry arms and prevent the producers from being armed. Frederick Engels defined the state as a body of armed men. Of course, there's more to it than that. But in the end, its coercive role on behalf of one section of society against the rest is the essence of the state. It allows the ruling classes to keep taking the social surplus. It also allows the members of the state apparatus to be paid the bigger surplus, the bigger the state. To reduce the need for constant violent coercion, the state is used by the owning classes to try to convince members of the exploited classes that the power and privileges of the minority are inevitable, permanent, and just. Thus, the state has not only a repressive function, but also one of ideological integration. Humanity survives by social labor, which implies social relations between people. This requires communication, language, and leads to the development of consciousness, reflection, and the production of ideas. Most of us think with the help of ideas learned in school or in church, and today with the help of ideas borrowed from TV, radio, advertising, newspapers, and the internet. Thus, the current production of ideas and of system ideas called ideologies is limited and shaped by the small minority in society who monopolize the means of communication. In every class society, the dominant ideology is that of dominant class. In the Middle Ages, poets, painters, and philosophers were literally maintained by the nobility and church. Later, the merchants and rich bankers appeared as patrons of the arts. The arrival of capitalism allowed ideological producers to work for an open market. However, almost the only buyers of capitalists and bourgeoisie state. Almost the only buyers are the capitalist state. Whatever the dominant ideology, its role is to maintain the status quo. In other words, class rule. The law protects ownership as does the family. Religion teaches the exploited to accept their fate. Moral and political ideas seek to justify the rule of dominant class with old sayings and half-truths. Although the ideas of the ruling class are dominant, they are not alone. There are the ideas of the previous ruling classes reflected how consciousness lags behind changes in material reality. And there are ideas of a new revolutionary class which is emerging, which has begun the fight for its emancipation, and which must free itself from the ideas of the oppressors before it can throw off the oppression itself. The more stable a class society is, the less class struggle challenges the relation of production, the mode of production, the system itself. But the more economic and social instability there is, the more the class struggle will develop to the point of posing the question to overthrow the system, the question of a social revolution. A social revolution breaks out when the exploited and oppressed classes no longer accept their domination by the ruling class as inevitable, permanent, and just. When they are no longer intimidated by no longer accept the ruler's ideology, and when they are putting together the material and moral forces needed to overthrow the ruling class. Social revolution occurs when the existing mode of production becomes an obstacle to the continued development of the productive forces and the material wealth of society. A social revolution replaces the rule of one class for that of another. That removes the previous ruling class from state power. Every social revolution is accompanied by a political revolution, but not every political revolution is a social revolution. For example, the English Parliament destroyed the absolutism of Charles I in the English Revolution of 1649. But they're not a socialist country. They're not a revolutionary country. And the American Congress destroyed the domination of George III over the 13 colonies. The French Revolution of 1789 destroyed the power of the Bourbon monarchy. And the French revolutions of 1830, 1848, and 1870 put in power different forms of government of the same social class, the bourgeoisie. The political revolutions resolve conflicts inside the same class, but do not change the mode of production. Unlike the feudal state, which is subordinate to the interests of an absolute monarch, the capitalist state must advance the interests of competing capitalists. That requires stable conditions of law and security for every capitalist, a unified national market, a monetary system, and certain international rules. They're created by the bourgeoisie state. When the bourgeoisie is doing well, it tends to reduce the economic functions of the state to the minimum, as just mentioned. Where bourgeoisie rule is weakening and in decline, the state tries to extend these functions to guarantee private profit. Before concluding, I want to say a word about modern-day Canada. Founded as a colonial settler state, which expropriated and nearly exterminated Indigenous peoples, and conquered and subordinated the French descendant settlers, Canada today is an imperialist state in its own right. Canada's economic elite export capital and exploit labor abroad, as well as at home. Its state denies the right of self-determination to oppress nations within its own borders, and it serves, protects, and upholds the dominance of existing Canadian capitalist class. In global terms, the class is a junior partner of the American capitalist class. But Canadian big business runs its own state, employs its own generously funded political parties, and exercises control through the larger apparatus of bourgeoisie, civil, judicial, and military institutions. That is why we say that even the most liberal capitalist democracy in the world, wherever it may be, is nothing more than minority rule. It is at best a dollar democracy. Only a working class socialist revolution can bring about majority rule, a just society, and a better world. Thank you.
Friends, before we open it up for interventions and questions to Corey, I have a couple, I guess, a pause for the cause, a couple of announcements to make. On July the 1st, right here in this very, very park, our own Christina, what's her name?
Mr. Freeland.
Christina, that's it. Christina Freeland will be here celebrating July the 1st. Well, we're going to be here too, but for a different reason. We're going to be coming, and we hope some of you will join us, or all of you will join us. We want to tell her that hands off Venezuela. Hands off Venezuela. You know, whether we agree with Maduro or we don't, that's neither here nor there. It's the Venezuelan people that put their government in, and it's up to the Venezuelan people what they want to do about it, not us here in Canada, okay? So whatever their decision is, we will support them, but it is their decision to make. And we're going to let Christina know that when she's here, celebrating. And celebrating on here on this land that she doesn't own and she tries to destroy every day. Celebrating what? So that's happening, of course, Monday, July 1st. And then on July the 6th at 1 p.m., for those of you who are maybe living out in Mississauga or close to Mississauga, there will be a forum. And the forum is on precarious work and low wages. What can we do? The speaker will be Kurt Young, who's a member of the Sheet Metal Workers Union, currently on province-wide strike. You probably heard about it. And a leader of Mississauga Socialist Action. So other speakers to be announced later. And that takes place Saturday, July the 6th at 1 p.m. and is at the Mississauga Valley Community Center, which is Frank Bean Lounge, 1275 Mississauga Valley Road. And that's near Burnhamthorpe and Central Parkway. So it's 1275 Mississauga Valley Road, Saturday, July the 6th at 1 p.m. So I think it will be a very interesting topic because precarious work seems to be the way to go these days here in Ontario, especially, but all across the country. And it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse with Ford, and we all know that. Okay, so now I'm going to open up the floor for interventions and questions. Unfortunately, we only have the one mic, and the microphone won't stretch very far. So unless you're going to speak very loud, feel free to come up and use the microphone to ask your question or to make an intervention. Okay. Judy.
In early society, the people here?
Yeah.
Yeah. In early society, women were, there was a matriarchy where women had a major say what was going on in the world. But when class society started, women became the property of man. Even in the slavery society, like in Greece and Rome and other countries. So women benefited by being in the communist society together with men. That women founded most of the agriculture and other things that we still have today. That was before the class society started.
Thank you, Judy. Okay, somebody else like to speak? Go ahead.
I can't think of anything intelligent to say as it.
Yeah, maybe something will come to you. I'm going to say something.
I strongly suspect a lot of people who don't really understand that.
Hello, everyone. I thought I would like to inform you all of a recent alt-right dog whistle that you may encounter on the internet. It is using the clown emoji next to the world emoji. For those of you who are not aware, the far right has decided that all of society is a clown world and are now using this to menace various social causes throughout the internet. If you encounter this, please call it out and take note of who is making these accusations. They will make statements like, trans people are working against their natural way, and try to equate it to illogical situations, and then proceed to claim that the world is run by clowns. This always ends up devolving into anti-Semitic statements that are very problematic, and it's very easy to notice when they start going off, but it will always start with the clown jokes and then devolve into horrible alt-right rhetoric. So if you notice this in your social groups, call it out when you first see it, and try to get the people who are just doing it as a joke to understand that this is actually super problematic. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.
Thank you, brother. Okay, who's next? Julius?
Okay, so I'm going to try not to get any feedback. So my name is Julius. I'm a member of Socialist Action. Can everyone hear me? Oh yeah. I can hear myself pretty loud, so I don't think I need to. Okay, so anyway, I want to talk about protecting the environment because this is a major issue that is on almost everybody's minds about how we're going to deal with this climate crisis. And so the dominant sort of ideas essentially is victim blaming, like you need to recycle more, you need to stop buying so much plastic, stop being so consumerist, and if we all do these small things and do our part, we will stop this inevitable major global temperature increase that's going to wreak havoc on the environment around the world. But the reality is that it's the economic system that's responsible for the overproduction that exists today. And its entire purpose is the private profit of a tiny minority of humanity, of the capitalist class. And so, I work for the Ministry of Environment. I mean, I don't tell people this stuff on the phone, because if I did, I'd get fired. But the reality is that it's the system that's responsible as opposed to your personal consuming habits. And that needs to really be focused on more than it has been. And I was just at a recent union convention because I'm involved with my union, and I mentioned this. And people really need to realize this. There was a Leap Manifesto which came out. How many people here have heard of the Leap Manifesto? It came out like 2 years ago or something, a few folks. So this was a document that was signed on by a bunch of people, a bunch of different political backgrounds. Even 20% of conservative supporters supported it. And it wasn't a revolutionary document, but it was critical of the economic system. And you don't hear that enough from a lot of environmental groups. But the reason why I bring this up is because Corey was talking about the development of all of these different economic systems, and we're talking about capitalism. And socialism is counterposed to capitalism, and so this is a major hurdle that we're going to have to face going forward. Is getting rid of this private profit system that benefits the 1% of the 1% and screws the rest of us. And we live in this, going back to the role of the state, this situation where we are held to account for destroying the planet when we're not reaping the benefits really of destroying the planet. It's the 1% of the 1% that is. And they have massive amounts of wealth that they're not reinvesting into the economy. They're not even investing it into green alternatives. In fact, they say we need to build the pipelines now because they need money to transition, like we should accommodate them further. They're serious about this stuff. So, if that doesn't make you angry enough, I don't know what will. There's certainly a lot. Anyway, I'm going to be giving a presentation next Wednesday, so I'll see some of you then.
Thank you. Okay, Larry?
I'm going to follow up on what you said. I'm going to say very little and very simple statements.
Good evening, everyone.
What you're describing.
Isn't this beautiful?
Yeah. And everyone basically buys into
Summer
it.
is here, and we're in Christie Pitts Park. I can't think of a better use of this piece of real estate. How do they get away with it? That's one of the reasons why Corey gave that excellent presentation on the origins of class in the state. Because the rulers use all kinds of contradictory and twisted arguments to justify the status quo, to justify this crazy society in which we find ourselves. Some of them argue, well, class doesn't really exist. It's a meritocracy. Everyone is an individual. You just apply yourself and you'll do well, and those who don't do so well, it's their fault. Classes don't really exist. That's one myth. The other myth is, well, classes always existed, and therefore it's inescapable, this hierarchy, this inequality, this exploitation, this oppression. And when we talk about the existence of classes and class oppression, that's the basis on which there's, gender oppression, sexual orientation oppression, oppression of national minorities, linguistic minorities. These are subsets of class oppression, and they exist because the rulers know that they're a tiny, tiny minority, and in order to rule, they've got to convince one section of the working class to take up a complaint against the rest of it, or some parts of it. Divide and conquer. You're familiar with that concept. But I just want to emphasize a couple of points that Corey made so well in his presentation. First of all, does class really exist? Well, just ask the hundreds of Uber drivers that decided this week to join the United Food and Commercial Workers Union.
Hear, hear.
Why do you suppose Uber drivers and Foodoras and others in the gig economy are deciding to join unions, form unions, struggle against bad bosses? Because their conditions are shit, and they've had enough. And they know that they can only overcome these problems, collectively. Or ask the building trades workers. Any building trades workers here who are part of this great Ontario strike? There's one. Quite a few building trades workers have joined Socialist Action recently, and we're very proud to have them in our ranks. And you know what they're fighting for? The bosses in the construction industry want them to work longer hours for the same pay. And they also want to make the job less safe. More injuries are going to occur if the bosses have their way. So the sheet metal workers, not the plumbers right now, but other sectors are involved in a fight. And we're part of that fight. Or ask the postal workers if there are any classes. The postal workers had rotating strikes last fall. Do you remember? November, December. We were part of blockading a couple of big postal facilities here in solidarity strikes. And that was because the government was not listening to two things. One, the workers were tired of having the highest incidence of injury in any federal sector employment. Postal workers wanted more safety, and they wanted more people on the mail delivery routes so workers don't have so many back injuries. And they also wanted to have a fair collective agreement negotiated. So Trudeau, and they wanted green transportation. Yeah, that's very important. Postal workers are fighting for converting the gasoline-powered trucks that deliver your packages and other things to green energy vehicles. And that is very, very doable. An electric fleet with recharging stations that would serve more than just those vehicles, would serve communities, and postal banking. But the government wouldn't listen to that, and Justin Trudeau, who says he's a feminist, who says he's a democratic, progressive person, he ordered them back to work, and there's some arbitration process which is still ongoing, and we don't know the result, and I hope postal workers don't accept any kind of inferior deal. Or ask the Oshawa GM workers. General Motors in Oshawa decided that they can make more money by moving the jobs somewhere else. And so that means 5,000 auto workers are going to be jobless, and a highly skilled workforce with lots of equipment that could be used to produce the cars of the future, the vehicles of the future, green energy vehicles. That's going to require public ownership. So class really does exist. Did class always exist? Well, not for 1 million years. Our species has been around for about 1 million years. That's a big number, I know. Think about it. We've been around for about 1 million years, but only for the last 15, 16, 17,000 years, that's like a blink in terms of the span of 1 million years. Only the last 15,000 years after the agricultural revolution did we have class, because the surplus was dominated by a small self-appointed caste of priests and military people who controlled the guns, who controlled the weapons. So now class only stands in the way of progress. It threatens the very survival of the human species. Big oil and the banks, they profit from the carbon economy. They don't care if it means the destruction of plant and animal species, the destruction of human civilization. So we've got to get rid of that system. I think that's the point. That's the cardinal point. The state. The state serves the ruling class. When the vast majority rule globally, there will be no need for a state. There'll be no need to alienate the population from the administration of its affairs. So what is the difference between Marxism and anarchism? I'm going to end on this point. Well, the Marxists are convinced that a revolution led by the working class will be necessary to overcome the most highly centralized ruling class in human history. They're highly centralized, and they will stop at nothing to prevent the workers from exercising a true economic democracy. So that's why we think a revolutionary party is necessary, a revolutionary working class party in alliance with all oppressed sections of society. The monopoly capitalist class is global in its reach, and its repressive system threatens our very survival. Only the democratic uprising of the vast majority, led by a revolutionary workers' party, which we're trying to build in our own modest way through our daily activity on many, many issues in this area and around the world, can overcome that challenge. And we think humanity is something worth preserving. Don't you?
Any other questions? Any questions for the speaker? Yes?
You can go first. I need to think about it.
Sure.
I'm trying to find a good quote even that I would use to
Okay.
explain. Neoliberalism means a lot of different things. It's doing a lot of different.
My name's Ty. I'm a QP Local 2 electrical worker at the TTC and a communist. And I'm really glad that Socialist Action put on this event. I'm not a member of the organization, but I'm really glad to hear the presentation here. And it's really something else to hear that there's members of the building trades that are on strike right here, right now. But revolutionary greetings to the sheet metal workers. I hope we can hear from some of you. Would like to know what's going on. Maybe the chair who's organizing the meeting could have one of these comrades give a report. I think this presenter really explained that private property and the class division ensuing from it is neither natural nor permanent, and the same goes for the state. But there's a third thing, and Judy touched on it, and that's the family. The family has only been around as long as private property, and it will only continue to exist as long as private property. And it's just as oppressive as class exploitation and the state. And a communist society is a future global society without private property, without the state, and without the family. One where there is free 24/7 childcare and people are free to live and associate with one another on whatever basis they see fit, free from economic compulsion. Yeah, so the abolition of the family is very much part of the tradition of socialism, and particularly part of the communist program for women's liberation. I had a question, and it pertained to a part of Corey's presentation. You said that for the past 12,000 years, there have been revolts of oppressed classes, and the reason why they've not abolished social inequality in general is because the productive level of society was not high enough to produce a surplus sufficient for everyone to live on equal terms. Did I understand you correctly? Is that? Yeah. So, Marx, the founder of proletarian communism, drew from the French socialist Saint-Simon, who did not see socialism as a backward-looking, rustic or primitive equality, but a equality based on technological development and mass production. That in order to have a truly egalitarian society, we need to produce more than enough for everyone so that there doesn't need to be competition. And that means not less industry, but more. Not on a chaotic exploitative basis that we're accustomed to under this mode of production, but a reindustrialization of North America, and particularly of the colonized world, whose development was held back by imperialism. There was metallurgy and whatnot in Africa that was destroyed by the slave trade and colonization. So I just ask because I noticed that there's the reference to eco-socialism and to environmentalism, and it's an aspect of working class communism that's quite different from what's trendy on the left right now, is actually ramping up the total level of production and understanding that equality doesn't just come through moral goodwill, but actually has to have a material basis. And that's a future global centrally planned economy where there's more than enough to go around for everyone. So that's a comment and a question.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll go in reverse. So,
it's all good.
Being able to meet the needs of everyone so that everyone can be equal within society, in terms of productive forces. I think that in the industrialized world, in what we call the first world, I guess, you have something like that. You have enough capacity to produce enough goods to make sure that everyone has a place to sleep, that no one's going to go hungry, that everyone can get where they need to go, that they can get the education they need, or some kind of education, and they don't have to spend all their time, doing menial tasks. That's kind of what it meant by there wasn't enough productive forces to relieve people of drudgery, of sort of repetitive tasks, or like ditch digging or whatever, any kind of thing like that, But we're reaching a point now, through some people might call it technocracy or whatever, I can't remember what it's called, the zeitgeist, where there's so much automated productive forces. But the problem is that they're controlled by the capitalist caste. They're controlled by private property, by private ownership. So, as Julia said, the majority of people cannot benefit from those productive forces. We talked about billions of dollars in bank accounts. My friend calls that dead money. It's not doing anything. Whereas in the old, like in the Middle Ages, before there was currency, especially before there was digital currency, the royalty and the private property ownership could only amass so much private property before it became absolutely ridiculous. And which led to the French Revolution and other revolutions, But so we're at that point in the first world, but in the third world, there's still not very much technology, not very much industrialization. And that's something that the whole world as a whole, under a socialist government, but that should be our aim anyways, would be to bring those places into the first world, to bring them electricity everywhere, to make sure that everyone has telecommunications, to make sure that there aren't food scarcities, and that clean water, and that has to go along with the environment, which is what Julia's talked about. If there was democratic control of communities or of any space, what community would allow like a pulp and paper plant to set up upriver from them where they're going to get their fresh water? What community would allow a pipeline to go right through their backyard? The thing is that there are systems hundreds, thousands of kilometers away deciding for these communities what's going to happen to them. And that's the problem, and that's why we have these things going, because it's all for the benefit of the 1%. They don't care about you and I and 10 million, 5 billion other people. You know, they only care about amassing their private property. There's a quote I like. I can't remember who said it, sort of, but it's back in Roman times, and some guys just railing against the Roman Empire. They come in here with their troops, and they destroy our communities and whatever, and someone else in the community comes to him, and he's like, what are you talking about? They built an aqueduct, they built roads, they built houses, and the guy said, they didn't build this for us. They didn't build this for the people. They built this for their armies, you know, so they could move across the world and exploit people everywhere. And I mean, that's what we're seeing. So I think if we to have a socialist future, I mean, is a democratic future. You know, it's they call it the dictatorship of the majority. You know, it's because right now we have the dictatorship of the minority, the ruling class, and so we want to make sure the majority has the say in what's happening in the world. And so that's just, I hope that answers your question to some degree, anyways. Does it? Yeah, I don't know.
More industry or less?
No, more industry,
More
but
industry.
but sustainable industry,
Okay.
with thought and community input is what I talked about. Not having one person or 5 people at a boardroom decide what's going to happen. We want more industry and more productive forces to sustain society and move society forward to make life easier. To make life easier for everyone. You know, but we don't want to have production just for the sake of production, just for the sake of monetary accumulation, like the capitalist system does, where they store billions of dollars in offshore bank accounts. They don't have to pay taxes, so they don't have to, you know, so they can underfund public interests and therefore destroy those public institutions and make people dependent on the private sector. Anyway, so I hope that talks about that. And just to talk a little bit about the family, thank you. Just talk a bit about the family. It doesn't mean that there aren't going to be mothers and fathers and whatever. It just means that they're not going to be isolated, that you're not going to be expected to have a family to be able to live in society. Because that's the way it's going, where if you're a single person or you're a single parent or whatever, it is unless you have like $100,000 a year job or whatever, it is very hard to get by. So society coerces you into making sure you pair up with someone so you can support a family and this kind of thing. So it's not going to be some abolition of the family, of the relationship between family members, but it will be the abolition of the family unit, the nuclear family, sort of as we know it. And I mean that's kind of what I think, anyways. Where a community will raise people. They always say it takes a village, right? I mean, and I truly believe that. But in today's society, and this kind of goes into one of my other points about individualism and the neoliberal ideology, is that we're also isolated. You know, care about your family, take care of your family, make sure your family's going to get by, make sure your kids are going to go to university. And it doesn't have to be that way. We have enough resources and enough skilled people, enough educated people to make sure that everyone can go to university for free. Like it's not free, but the idea is that we all trade our skills with each other, and we can make sure that everyone gets what they need and what they deserve. You know, and not just that, but what they want. I'm sorry, you'll get to your question.
No, it's not a question.
Okay.
The word deserve is very Christian.
Yeah, sorry to talk about community control.
Most Canadians don't realize that.
So I talked a little bit about social relations, but not much. Just sort of about the class thing, kind of what Barry was talking about how there is class. I was reading a little bit of Marx and just talking about how like the social classes is, you know, most people stay within their class. If people go to private school, to business school, that's where they end up. Those are the people they know. Those are their circles. Those are their connections. That's why you see in the White House, Trump appoints his family to all these key positions. You see Ford in Ontario doing the same thing, basically. Same thing. I mean, these are the circles that we exist within, right? Whether they're friend circles or whatever, but these are social relations. Whereas if you're a member of the working class or you're an immigrant, you know, you stay within sort of your immigrant group for the most part, is at least my experience. And so that is the one of the goals of socialism, is to break those social classes and to create a classless society where everyone is equal and everyone can relate to each other, you know, where everyone has the same opportunity. About Julius and the environment, and to do a little bit with the comrade about the clown world or whatever. The capitalist class and the capitalist system has left what people call, you know, a smoking fascist wreck. That's what they call the earth. Some people have called it that. And that you know, the capitalist class only cares about themselves, like I said. They don't care about the environment, they don't care about you, they don't care about anything except for themselves, their family maybe, whatever. They're very individualistic. But further on the spectrum, or whatever you want to say, This plays into the fascist position of sort of survival of the strong. You know, I was reading about this today a little bit, and you know, they don't care. They will actively support destroying the environment. They will actively support, you know, letting migrants die, because that's their ideology. Is they think that only the strong should survive. And so they will go hand in hand with the capitalists destroying the world. And I mean, if you think back to the Second World War, and I'm sure many times before that, when counter-revolutionary forces were sort of rose up, they're supported by the capitalist class. That is their last defense against mass action, against the workers' democracy. And just the last thing to Judy about matriarchy and patriarchy and whatever. And yeah, before the patriarchy of the feudal lords or way back to whatever, there were matriarchies. There weren't only matriarchies, there were also patriarchies, but there was a much more equal society, and women were not oppressed. Women were not only in the household, not only child rearing or whatever. Women were a part of society, and they had to be to survive, you know, as they do now. Women need to be a part of everything that men are, that anyone is, you know. Everyone should be equal. And this sort of brings me back to what comrades talked to me about, or they did a presentation on, talking about racism and the invention of racism. There wasn't always racism. Racism was invented to allow people to dominate others. It was invented to produce slaves, you know, to justify slavery, to pit one group of people against another. And this sort of gets into one of my favorite topics, which is privilege and knowing your privilege, you know. We all come from different places, and we all are different people. But you know, and we're not the capitalist bourgeoisie. But we should recognize where we are and what privilege we have when we go anywhere, when we interact with people. You know, because we can be part of the problem, you know, or we can be part of the solution. And the solution is treating people as people. That's all we are. You know. So, anyways, I'll just end it there, I guess. I'll give it to. Thank you.
Okay, did you have a question?
I guess, could I just actually use the microphone?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
I really don't want to say too much because it would be difficult to make a point, and I think people would not notice. Actually, a friend said something that I want to read to you guys, because I think one of the biggest problems... You can't hear me?
Just put it in closer to your mouth, that's all.
Okay. So one of the problems is that I think a lot of people here, not here, just in general, don't understand neoliberalism, which is a pretty broad term. It's interchangeable with globalism. I just wanted to call attention to identity politics. Pride just ended. I didn't go, mostly for this reason. So the future of identity politics may be perception politics, because at the end of the day, identity politics may have less to do with how you think about yourself or what you identify with, but rather how people perceive each other, and by extension, rather than being about a diversity of identities, political issues that arise out of a diverse range of perception of each other and the world around us, and the politics of perception management. So I mean, a lot of what Corey said actually covered a lot of what I wanted to say anyway, but yeah, another thing, like fascism is eugenics. It's eugenics, and a lot of eugenics thinking is still totally present today, and it flies under the radar, and no one wants to talk about it. I actually used to be involved with a group called Mad Pride, which actually began in the city of Toronto. It's also called the Psychiatric Survivor Movement. So a lot of people who are working with that human rights movement, a lot of people are taking the brunt of the mismanagement of systems, of social perception, of social welfare systems, the non-existence of a social welfare net. It's getting much worse in the city of Toronto. There's the housing crisis, people are leaving. I don't really know what I'm trying to say.
All the problems.
People, bring your friends to these events and start doing things that actually demonstrate something that is socialist or helps people. We were having a conversation about building housing. Vote NDP, it's probably the only realistic option. I'm an anarchist, but I vote NDP anyway. I think it's practical. Yeah, I don't know. They are.
Okay, thank you. And it does make sense what you're saying. Okay, anybody else?
whatever, he said most of it already.
All right, I just want
like
to say
talking in front of
I run into a lot of people that have a lot of separate issues that are all like near and dear to my heart. Like, I agree that everyone should be whoever the heck they want to be, and I agree that we have housing issues in Toronto. But until we topple this doppelganger, like these crazy monsters that are funneling all of the money and making all of the decisions, like our democratic vote is gone. Democracy, like as we know it, is gone. It's all funded. And as soon as it gets to the top, it's the only place where there's an open ballot box. It's the only place in our whole entire voting system where it's not a closed ballot. So all of them can be gerrymandered, all of them can be bribed, threatened, and everyone knows exactly who they're voting for. So all these corporations, these rich people control everything we do. So all of these issues I agree with need to be dealt with, need to be tackled. And I see a lot of people, if we can amalgamate through love, like what we need to do and topple this first, then we can deal with all of those issues, and I'm sure they will all be very justly dealt with, as opposed to now, which makes half of this makes no sense. Everyone I know is for something. Everyone I know cares deeply about, or doesn't care, but doesn't care enough to hate, doesn't care enough to want to do violence to people because of it. It blows my mind, man. So yeah, we got to get rid of these elitists first before we can really tackle any of our real issues.
I also didn't know.
Thank you very much. Okay, brother.
Hi, everybody. You might have known Robert Lovelace. He's a native elder, and he once said that when he's talking about exploitation, that when people benefit in some way, somebody else are losers, and that is oppression, and that dissent is within ourselves to recognize that. And wherever people start to recognize that, coming to terms with conscience, I'm paraphrasing this, so that's where the dissent is. So if we can be aware of that dissent within ourselves and within others, then that's one aspect of that. I myself personally, I play music, but I'm not a auto mechanic. I'm not a banker. I don't have all these other skills. So just like the kidney does a certain job, the lungs do a certain job, the skin does a certain job in the body, we have this collective body which now on the planet Earth we're looking at crises that are multiplying due to ignorance. And I'm hoping that I can play my part, but recognizing I don't have the whole overview and that I'm not an expert. But I can recognize certain things which people are recognizing, for example, the environment, but that, for example, if we build a house and people have to pay a bank mortgage, compound interest, instead of paying off the house in 10 years, they spend an extra 15 years out of a 25-year mortgage working in crappy jobs that they hate, that uses resources, uses energy, ends up in the landfill just so they can pay off this insane compound interest. The house is already built, so if people are already living in houses, why can't they just be living like that and then build additional affordable housing and not have people going through these treadmills? So there's like a lot of different aspects of the enslavement, the debt, and as much as people might hate the system, it would be great to go out and grow some vegetables, but my landlord is not going to take like a case of lettuce for rent. It's until the changes happen in terms of we recognize that we're all in this together and stop wasting our time and recognize how are we housing and clothing and feeding one another, or are we contributing towards the destruction of the planet, to militarization and making the other people to blame for whatever reasons because they're different than us. So it already allows some emotional settling, not to become complacent, but also to find peace within ourselves and link up with other people who have that understanding of dissent. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
I probably fudged it.
Sam.
What's that?
I probably fudged what I really wanted to say.
No, it's good.
Hi, my name is Sam. I'm a member of Socialist Action. So
we've seen through the series of revolutions, going from the American to the French on up, it's always the lower classes, the sans-culottes, the radical farmers, those erecting the barricades, the Napoleonic veterans that were carrying these through to the fore. For what were articulated by bourgeois liberals with slight, disagreements with the current regime, whether it's a constitutional monarchy or republic, but the people in the streets took it forward. And when they pushed for it, they won. But oftentimes they didn't necessarily have what they needed, the tools in their toolkit to erect, a revolutionary program and a more permanent egalitarian society. And we saw this with the Paris Commune, where they almost did it, and was demonstrated by the Bolsheviks in 1917 when they smashed the bourgeoisie, they smashed the reactionaries, and developed the first workers' state, the workers' soldiers' deputy state. So we know, the bourgeoisie is a lot more powerful now, and they have massive weapons at their disposal, but the system is presenting cracks. And we engage in politics, whether it's the NDP, very critically, so we can demonstrate to the working class that we can win gains here, but also it's a training ground for political action, and showing them that we can't have illusions in bourgeois democracy. And we need to be ready, creating the Leninist combat party that can intervene in these struggles in the working class and unite a modern vanguard and a united front in winning these battles in the future. And this is part of the fight we see today with Doug Ford, part of the struggles against the current regimes. The front is fought in the streets, whether we're facing down fascists, an armory, or engaging critically in North America's Labour Party, to fighting for transitional demands that could range anywhere from something as small as a minimum wage to the 30-hour work week to mass public transit. And in engaging these battles, we train our class to take on more and more confidence and to organize and win when these situations do and will present themselves. For instance, in the next financial crash, the next outbreak of World War, the next food shortage. My name is Sam again, presenting on July 10th on Socialism in Canada. Thank you.
Right. Same words of the LCBO.
Okay, are there any more questions?
Building trades?
I can speak on behalf of the plumbers, but what is it you would like to know?
Well, because our sheet metal comrade is not here. Comrade.
Oh, okay.
Kurt is not here because he's preparing. There's going to be a vote tomorrow, and he's on the picket line and doing different things. He's going to speak on July the 6th, but in Mississauga. So but he will be coming to some of these things, but not tonight, unfortunately, because he's getting ready for the vote tomorrow. So let's all send good thoughts to him that the vote is the way that the workers want it to go.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Because they need a good collective agreement. That's for sure. Okay, so and as Luke said, he's a plumber, and so that's not who's on strike right now.
No, but we were.
Yeah.
But not anymore.
Yeah, please.
Sure. But,
Thank you. I'm Luke. I'm not really sure what you would like to know.
Tell us about your
or
strike.
What you're curious about. Well, it was a strike. They were trying to make us work 40 hours a week, which doesn't sound terrible to most of you, I'm sure. I'm sure most of you do work 40 hours a week or so, but we work 36. And we really didn't want to go backwards. So we fought that. It turns out our business owners are also quite greedy as far as monetary raises and overtime and things like that. So we stood our ground. There was a long negotiation process, which ended in a 3-day strike. And they gave us more or less something that we could accept, and we did. It wasn't necessarily a win, but it wasn't a complete loss either. Unfortunately, the sheet metal counterparts were not as lucky. For some reason, the contractors did not want to give them a decent deal at all, much less reasonable than our counterparts. So. I don't know enough to talk much about the sheet metal guys. Kurt is a friend of mine, but he's been so busy lately that I haven't heard much from him. I think it's kind of crazy. If you want to know something else, please ask, but that's about it.
Yeah, I know in talking to Kurt, and you're right, he's been very busy. I mean, he's 16 hours a day. But I know one of the things that you're fighting against is and a lot of the trades unions, people I think are in the same boat sometimes. You know, there's apprentices where you learn your skill and you're working with somebody who's already got the skill. Well, apparently what you're doing, as far as I understand it, is instead of maybe having one or two, you know, under you that you're teaching, they're going to have more than that. So in other words, they don't have the time anymore. So they're sending these apprentices out to do a job all on their own that don't know what they're doing, could get themselves electrocuted and God knows what else, depending on what kind of work you're doing. So these are the things that the bosses is forcing on the workers. So I know that's one of the things that you're talking about, which is very dangerous. It's health and safety, but they don't care. Okay, so I'm going to ask one more time. Is there somebody that would like to speak that hasn't spoken yet before I close the speakers list for first time? No. Okay, so we got one speaker on the list that wants to speak the second time, and that's Barry. And then I'm going to come back to Corey to wrap up.
I think I didn't introduce myself previously. So my name is Barry. I'm one of the editors of Socialist Action newspaper and federal secretary of our national organization. And I want to take up what the comrade over in that quadrant of the circle said about the voting system. I think he's not here. Okay. In other words, if I speak long enough, he'll hear what I have to say. No, I'm not going to go on at length. But, yeah, the chair won't let me, but I will say this. He's right. The voting system is rigged. Big money calls the shots. They decide what gets airtime. In order to break through the monopoly control of the airwaves, you have to organize movements that take up space in the streets, that are fighting in the workplace, that are fighting for social justice. That's how we are heard. We call this system a dollar democracy. If you got the dollars, you have democracy. It's like freedom of the press. If you have a press, you have freedom. If you don't own a press, well, you can try through social media, but it's hard to compete with the big guys. So what can we do about this situation? Well, working people have always been very ingenious, and they've always fought to find a way to be heard, to organize, to magnify their voice through parties of the labor movement. And the New Democratic Party is one of those. It is a working class party. It's a working class party which was formed by a fusion of the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, which was a farmers, workers' protest party in the 1930s, the Great Depression, and the Canadian Labour Congress, which came together in 1959, 60, 61 to form the NDP. But unfortunately, the NDP has a pro-capitalist leadership. There's no prettifying the fact that it sells out the working class. But it's caught in a dilemma. That is, it has to represent the interests of its members and voters to some degree, or it will lose that social base and the petty privileges that flow to the bureaucracy that result from it. So it's contradictory in nature. It has a pro-capitalist leadership and offers no solutions to the conditions of monopoly capitalism in this world. But the interests of its members, the 120,000 members of the NDP, the 4 million voters for the NDP at the last federal election, lie in the direction of public ownership, lie in the direction of economic democracy, go in the direction of social justice, ecology, and we call that socialism. Real bottom-up control of society. That's what we mean by socialism.
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't.
So how can we work for the triumph of a workers' agenda in a situation where you have only one mass working class labor-based political party in North America, because there isn't one in the United States? So the NDP represents a kind of a distorted and partial advance over the state of the workers' movement in the United States, here in Canada. Well, we say that we have to, as socialists, work to advance our ideas and to advance very specific struggles for social gains in the existing organizations of the working class. So what about the unions? The unions suffer from the same problem that the NDP does. It has a pro-capitalist leadership. Union leaders have in recent days been negotiating concessions. They concede to austerity. They have arrangements with bosses for two-tier, which means young workers, new workers get paid less than people they're working beside shoulder to shoulder in the workplace. And that's grossly, grossly unfair. We argue that the problem in the unions and the problem in the NDP and the problem in all of the other mass working class organizations has the same solution. And what is that? We have to organize rank and file radical bodies. We call that class struggle unionism. We organized the Socialist caucus in the NDP. We had an important presence and impact on the NDP provincial convention just this past weekend in Hamilton. We're at every labor convention, all the major unions, all the major federations, provincially and across Canada. We fight to replace the leaders. We contest their positions in elections. We submit resolutions which advance the independent interests of the working class. We sell literature. We organize fringe meetings like forums during meal breaks. We sign people up to fight to advance the cause of the working class. And that means not only in this country, but internationally, because solidarity knows no borders. When our sisters and brothers suffer in Palestine, our answer has to be boycott, divestment, sanctions. When our sisters and brothers suffer in Venezuela because they're trying to strangle the economy, whatever we might think of the Maduro government, it's for the Venezuelan people to decide, and we say hands off Venezuela, and that's why we're going to be demonstrating here in Christie Park next Monday, Canada Day, at 1 o'clock, demanding that Chrystia Freeland answer for her crimes, the crimes of the Trudeau government. When we are confronted by the austerity agenda of the Ford government at Queen's Park, and yes, the Trudeau government as well in Ottawa, and all of the other governments provincial across the country, we say they have to be met with job action. Not just polite petitions, not just phone-in radio programs, lobbying of politicians in the halls of Parliament. We say that it's time that we organize and leave no worker behind. That means every struggle should have the maximum support of the working class, the conscious layers of the working class to bring in the rest of the working class behind it. We need to get rid of the Ford government with a general strike in Ontario and not wait 3 years to see what more destruction they will wrought at our expense. We're for Palestine, solidarity, Venezuela, Indigenous peoples, against the pipelines for a rapid transition to a green energy alternative. And if you agree with those ideas, if you agree with most of those ideas, I say to you this: join Socialist action in building a mass revolutionary workers' party. Spend time with us, get to know the campaigns that are underway, learn more about this world and our place in it and our ability to change it. We're here, we welcome you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now we're going to turn it back to Corey for just a brief wrap-up. And there you go.
I gotta follow that? Oh my god. Well, I just want to say about Socialist Action, I mean, it's been a huge part of my life since I've joined. I mean, it's really changed my life and made me feel like I'm actually like able to do something, even if it's very little, but I'm actually doing what I want to be doing, you know, with some of my free time. And I talked to another comrade who recently joined, and he said it had changed his life. He said it, you know, it literally, he felt lost, he felt like he didn't know what to do, and he said it literally changed his life. I didn't believe him at first. I was like, you think it changed your life? And he said, yeah. He said it changed my life completely. So anyways, that's just his take on it, but I think Socialist Action is a fantastic organization, and I'm proud to be a part of it. I don't know what to say here. Let's see. About the dollar democracy. Yeah, I mean, that's what we have here. I mean, there's no illusions. That gets into sort of one of my other points is like, I don't know if anyone saw here Sorry to Bother You, but one of the union organizer from that movie talked about, you know, if people have a problem and they don't see a solution or an answer to that problem, they just accept the problem. They just live with the problem, you know. It's like if you have terminal cancer and no one says there's any cure, what are you going to do? You know, you're just going to die. So that's the problem, and that's why we're here, and why, you know, many people on the left speak and try to give voice to solutions. There are ways to get out of this. You know, we're not dead yet. You know, there are ways to have a revolution, you know, and change things, and that could happen in many ways. But what needs to happen is democratization of virtually everything in society. We talk about a dollar democracy. Well, how about workplace democracy? I ask anyone here who's not in a unionized workplace to go back to work and just talk to one person about unions, about workplace democracy, about something that maybe you've brought to your management, whatever, and they just closed the door on you or said, we will think about it or whatever. Just talk to them about it. I mean, you don't have to form a union tomorrow, but maybe get people thinking about it, because that's something I find in my workplace is it's not even on anyone's radar. You know, they clock in, they clock out. That's it. They don't really, we socialize, but we don't talk about, you know, changing the workplace. We talk about the problems, but that's pretty much it, you know. And so I encourage everyone to go to work tomorrow or whenever you're going to work next, and just talk about something like an issue you're having and something you can maybe, you know, work together with other people at your work. Barry covered the NDP pretty well. We are in the NDP because that's where the workers are, as Barry said many times. That's why we're part of the NDP, because the bureaucracy, whatever it is not serving, you know, the majority of people. But the workers are there, 100,000 members, you know. I don't know how many union affiliates, but yeah, well, you know, we're trying to.
Dollars from those corporations that pay NDP to get a platform.
That's right, yeah, and so we need to demand, as members of the NDP, we need to demand they don't take that money and that they listen to their base. You know, we fought tooth and nail to get a BDS resolution on the floor of the convention, and it got suppressed. But people are talking about the NDP. When we mention BDS at the NDP convention, people cheer. Not just socialists, not just members of the Socialist Caucus. People cheer. Anyways, we can talk later. About the short work week. I mean, these are great things too, because it's not just about having a better work-life balance. It's about being better for the environment. They only work 4 days a week. That's only 4 days of commuting. That's a really good thing all around. And there's lots of innovative ideas like this about commuting. Like, how many people spend hours commuting every day? It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it doesn't have to be this way. And we can find creative solutions, but we need to have democratic control over you know, our lives, over the way society runs. About neoliberalism and identity politics, I mean, yeah, they're big problems in society, because that's, once again, who controls the media and who controls the voices that people are hearing. It's the big dollars. That's the majority of where things come from. So, of course, they're going to play on identity politics, because it separates us. I don't know how many arguments I've had with people about whatever, racial things, sexual things, whatever. You know, they're all important, and they're all important in their own way. But we need to look at the big picture as well. We need to consider those things, of course consider those things and recognize those things, but recognize what we all have in common and how we're all being oppressed under this system. Push the drink. And then to do with what Sam said about mass action, it's the only real way we have to affect change in society. We don't have dollars. We can't pay people to do things. We can't feed them. You know, the power that people have, the majority we have is people power. If we stop working, if we leave our workplaces and we refuse to produce more profit for the ruling class, then that's the only route to taking power. That's the only route, because that's what that dollar buys. It buys, you know, labor, really. And so if we take that labor away, we say, you know, the dollar's not an option anymore. You can't pay us because we're not accepting it. We're going to decide for ourselves what we're going to do with our labor. That is the only way to take power. And so if anyone speaks against mass action, just tell them that. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Just like I said, you know, we're the only reason that there are bankers, that there are politicians, you know, because of the work that people do, because of the things we create and the services we provide. They're the only reason that people have luxury, that people have untold wealth, is because of all the people producing things and maintaining society. Without all of the people doing that, all the workers doing that, there's nothing else. We talked about productive forces. Without those productive forces, without that base, there's nothing else. So those bankers and those politicians owe us everything they have. You know, they may be smart, they may be skilled at what they do, they may make us more productive, but they only are able to do that because of the things that we produce. And I want everyone to remember that they should be proud that they're a worker, and they should demand that they're compensated fairly. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you for coming tonight.
Okay, so thank you, Corey. Thank you, everybody, for coming. But like as Corey was saying, in mass action, you know, that's the only thing that we can do. That's our power. Can you imagine if we could shut the city down again? Remember Mike Harris? Any of you remember when Mike Harris was in power? It's been a few years ago now. But remember when we shut Toronto down?
Days of action.
The days of action when we shut a day of action in London. We had one in Hamilton. We had one in where else? A few cities. But I really remember the one in Toronto because I was one of the coordinators for it. And yes, Kitchener and Sudbury. But you know, maybe we didn't win everything with Mike Harris, of course not. But he backed off a lot of things that he was going to do, and it was mass action that did it. Okay, so can you imagine if we shut the province down? You know, it would only take one day. Everybody can afford to take one day and not go to work. I know it's difficult, but if we did that and shut the province down, then Ford would have to change his mind. I'm telling you, that's what it needs. Okay, just to clarify a little something so that people don't go away here and think that because they signed our sheet for information that they've joined, they've going to be a member. That's not how Socialist Action operates. If you want to become a member of Socialist Action, of course you can talk to Barry or me or Julius or or a few other members here, and then there's steps to be taken. When you sign the sheet that goes around, that's just to get more information, to let you know. You might get a call sometime and say, look, there's a public forum happening. If you haven't read about it, if you'd like to come, it's happening at Oisey, or it's happening here or there, or we're having this or that or something else. That's all you sign for. You're not a member of Socialist Action by signing that paper. So don't worry. You will decide that yourself, and you will talk to one of us, and like I says, there's steps to follow after that. Okay. You can fill out, yes, he has a card there. But I know sometimes when you're asked to join and then you've signed the paper, it can be, it could be some misunderstanding. Okay, so this ends this, but of course next Wednesday night at the same time, same place, it's Permanent Revolution. And the speaker will be, I think, Julius?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the following Wednesday, July the 10th, is Socialism in Canada, an Intro to Socialists. And I think that's you, Sam? There you go. Okay, so if you want to have further discussion, or whatever, a lot of us are going to the Clinton Tavern, so you can come over there and we can talk some more. But again, thanks for coming.
We need more women.
Have a good evening. Bye, Literature.
Well, Elizabeth chaired it, but